Welcome to Recalibrate Reality, the future of New York. Our guest today is Marcus Samuelsson, the internationally acclaimed chef behind a number of successful restaurants around the world, including Red Rooster, right here in Harlem. Last year, during COVID, Marcus turned some of his restaurants into full-time community kitchens, serving thousands of meals a day to those in need. He also helped start the Black Business Matter Matching Fund, and he put out his newest book, The Rise, Black Cooks and the Soul of American Food. In this episode, Marcus and I talk about recovery post-COVID, our mutual love for New York, and of course, food. And so now, let's recalibrate reality with Marcus Samuelsson. So Marcus, welcome to Recalibrate Reality.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be part of it.
Yeah, that's great to have you. So Marcus, I'm a born and bred New Yorker, and when I think about New York, and obviously I'm biased, but I think it's one of the greatest city, if not the greatest city in the world, and it's a beacon that attracts millions of people from all over, clamoring to be part of it. And as they say, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And you, my friend, have clearly made it here. So for those who don't really know you and your background, can you take a minute and maybe just talk about your background, how you ended up coming to New York and got so committed to really being someone that is so part of the fabric of the city?
Sure. I came really to New York in the late 80s as a teenager. I was part of a soccer traveling team and got a chance to go to Times Square as a teenager and see those lights. And I was hooked right away. I was like, wow, I knew then that I would come back. Maybe not to live here, but I was just like, wow, this city is amazing. For a Swedish kid to come to be in New York City, I was big. That's as good as it gets. When I came back to work here, after I've studied cooking in Japan, France, and Switzerland, that multiculturalism is something that I think I've always wanted, right? I'm born in Africa, born in Ethiopia, raised in Sweden. And a place like New York feels like home because there's other people with different backgrounds, and we all somehow seems to fit in the city. And there's also neighborhoods in New York that, there's a big city, but I live in a neighborhood like Harlem that is truly a village within the city. And there's pockets of neighborhoods like Harlem that you find them in Brooklyn and West Village and Queens and the Bronx and Uptown. That makes New York so special.
When you started in Midtown, right? So you were and you were working on some pretty high end restaurants, and then when it came time to open your own marquee restaurant, Red Rooster, you chose Harlem. Why'd you choose Harlem?
As a Black chef, going to a neighborhood like Harlem, coming to a neighborhood like Harlem, you got to think about Harlem. For me, it's Mecca of Black creativity in the world. That's where the Apollo is. That's where Rumar Bearden and Maya Angelou lived. So to have the chance to have a restaurant in that intersection of Lenox Avenue and 125th Street, half a block away from the iconic Sylvia's restaurant. For me, it's like, if I could be part of that, I had to be part of that. So feel really privileged to put Red Rooster and have Red Rooster be part of Harlem, not only of what we gotten out of it, but the amount of jobs that we've been able to create, and this traffic and dynamic of musicians, chefs, painters, regular Joes coming together to Red Rooster. We have so many great memories of that. And those memories is really what I held on to, especially during COVID, when you couldn't take the restaurant for granted anymore.
And COVID hits, right? And as for our business, obviously everyone was really caught off guard. And for us, I started to think about how we're going to navigate through this. And I came up with this concept of the 3 R's. Let's recalibrate everything in our business, everything that we were working on, every project that we were working on pre-COVID. How are we going to adjust for a post-COVID world? How are we going to make sure our employees were safe, that our customers we stayed in contact, and our business sustained itself. Then it was like recover, because we saw what was happening to our community all around us. And we knew it was going to be, decimated, the loss of life, the loss of livelihood. along the way. And then the last thing was sort of rebound, right? Which is how do we think that at some point this is going to get to the other side? How do we rebound in a post-COVID world to emerge stronger than we were before? And I'm curious, in sort of that recalibrate, recover for your community, and that rebound, I'm thinking of, post-COVID, in those categories, how you thought about things.
Well, I think those three buckets are really important, right? Because the shock is tremendous, was tremendous. We lost loved ones. We were all, in many times in various states, had no idea how to come back, right? This is not just the wear and tear it takes for you that you physically can see. It's also the mental part of this, right? The conversation you have at the dinner table at home that as families, when you get super worried, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to us? So that mourning stage and that worry part it sets in, right? But then there's a level of community strength and power. And for us, that meant partnering with World Central Kitchen, start serving our community. At Red Rooster, we served over 230,000 meals together with World Central Kitchen. And we found strength in that. I found strength in putting my mask, gloves on, leaving the house, serving the community, and coming back. Just that routine. I need to be part of that routine. Learning what the new normal is going to be, having conferences like this, not being in the room anymore, but still having a meaningful conversation. So those were all routines that we had to learn, right? Yep. And then the reboot of this, it's interesting you talk about it, but we have to remember after major disasters, there's pause, but then there's always greatness that comes out of that, right? Whether it's after Second World War, whether it's after 9/11, where we are in the world, there's always post some of the biggest creativity, some of the biggest ways of people working across the aisles are happening. And I know as New Yorkers, this is what's happening right now. You see many examples of that. Speaking about a great New Yorker like David Rockwell, he took this opportunity to help out restaurants and build restaurant outdoor patios across the city, whether it was in Chinatown or in Harlem for Melba or something like that, right? And that's just a tiny example. I'm going to give you another example. On my block, all the parents came together. We shut down our street and we created daycare for the kids because we knew that the kids if they couldn't go to the park, they could not just sit at home. So we as parents, we all had different skills. So as a chef, me and Maya cooked. There was a gym teacher. There was an art teacher. So everybody in this pod environment created a community. So we had as close to normal environment as possible. And that's what New Yorkers does, right? We figure it out little by little, block by block, and we make the best out of situation. And we're definitely not out of it, but it's stories like this that I think when we all have those dips of low, I think we can sort of draw on, and it's going to help us get to the next phase.
And, I think as I think about what we had gone through sort of post 9/11 as an example of how we all came together as a city and we were going to rebuild, and we were going to rebuild to be better and stronger than before. And I think with COVID, it's even worse in the sense of how it decimated so much, life and livelihood. And really, we have to reimagine where the world was to what it's going to be differently than we ever thought before. And as I think about it, this is sort of our generation's opportunity to be, our big moment, just like after World War II, to re-engage in being committed to community. And while we're focusing on building businesses, building them back so they're more equitable and they're more sustainable and they're more inclusive. Internally in the business itself and the community at large.
I do think that if we look at this as a reset, right, and it's fascinating how life works sometimes. But at the same time as COVID is happening, the country is also having this social justice conversation. And whether it's a coincidence or how it happened, there's going to be scholars that's going to discuss that better than us. But it happened right in front of our eyes. And it allows for that greater conversation. How can we create a more just society? How can we create a community that is inclusive? We all, regardless whether you're R or D, it doesn't matter. We all want to try to achieve a more just society. That's regardless, right? Especially in New York City. And I do think moments like this requires a new rethink, right? I remember after the economic crisis in 2008, that was the moment for me to really say, let's open Red Rooster. It wasn't just about open Red Rooster, but what was the questions I wanted to sort of address? It was, what does a restaurant do? The word restaurant means to restore your community. And for me, the greenest idea, the most inclusive idea would be to hire from the community. Why would a restaurant always, in a place like Harlem, why would the customer only come from downtown? Why would the staff only come from a different part of the city? So at that moment, we said, let's hire within the community. Let's create this intersection between inspiration and aspiration, right? Let's really create an intersection between where the locals are first, then downtown, uptown, and then also you add the incredible layers of tourists and the tri-state area. Now you have something that looks like New York City, but also feels like Harlem. And if that was the moment at 2010, post 2008, there's a new rethink that needs to happen with inclusivity, with a more just neighborhood conversation. And I know we can do it. And this challenge that is given out to us to shape is not just given out to parts of New York, it's given out to all of us, right? And how can we, and New York, we take pride. We want to do better than Paris. We want to do better than Los Angeles. We want to be this prime example of a city that took this incredible challenging situation. But look at us 10 years from now, 5 years from now, that we are a greener city. We are a more inclusive city. We have built up in places that were forgotten about. That's the goal with this. And as a small business owner, I have a responsibility. As a larger developer, you have a responsibility. So what does that say? This means that all of us are in, and we all kind of have to, it's like sports. You got to put your hand in and just say, I'm all in, right? And as a team, as a unit, we can do this.
You use the word sustainability in a way that a lot of people don't use it, but the way I think about it, which is, yes, environmental is part of sustainability, but so is equality of opportunity, so is economic sustainability, so is the community strength, right, and diversity. Without all that, you don't have a sustainable community. And that's something that we try to focus on, is broadening people's thinking about what sustainability means. And the second thing is individual accountability, right? Which is that we're all not going to change the world ourselves, but we can change a part of the world and be an example for others to follow. And I think you have been that way as you've grown. And then even, as you've done here, right, you started the Black Business Matter matching fund, right? And maybe you could take a second and just walk us through what made you do that and how you did and how that's working out so far.
Well, I mean, Black Business Matter Matching Fund was started in a similar way, actually, as a lot of things in my life have started. It wasn't just started by me. It took a whole group, right? And how did I get here? I got here between my parents, my grandparents, a bunch of mentors that saw something in me way before I saw it in myself. And they shaped me. And without them, people like Miss Leah Chase and people like my uncles in Sweden, I wouldn't be here sitting talking to you, right? So it's very important. But in terms of Black Business Matters Matching Fund, we were looking at how can we be part of the Reimagine post-COVID, right? Who are the stakeholders? And how can we actually rethink the wealth gap and the opportunity gap, right? And if you think about small businesses, it's very much like a family economy. A small business does not have necessarily access to a local bank that can provide that loan extension that other businesses might have. There is no government coming and helping them out, maybe, right? So it's really, if we're going to come back here, it's really going to be a blend between public-private, right? We're going to need governmental, federal grants. We're going to need local government to say, hey, how do we look out for, so we have a healthy community, both thriving in businesses and so on. But then also as private citizens, who do we know that we can partner with that can both broadcast but also raise money? And we were lucky enough in this first tranche to partner with Uber Eats to do this. And we will look for other, responsible businesses to say, hey, let's build this grant program, almost like a local GoFundMe, that you have to sort of get nominated to be part of Black Business Matters Matching Fund. And then eventually people will raise money for it. And that money will come from whether it's local family members that really care about that business, whether it be larger institutions that say they have grants and they want to ship it, or there will be corporate companies. So again, this is a patching job that end of the day comes down to people and people caring for one another.
Early on in the pandemic, one of my greatest concern were the small businesses and the restaurants, because, the larger business like ourselves and the big corporations, they had staying power. And frankly, in many cases, some of them actually were able to find ways to see their businesses thrive. But the small businesses, these are people that, spent their lives, building these businesses, literally, and then decades of work were decimated in days as COVID came in, no fault of their own. And so they lost their livelihood, and they don't have the ability to advocate for to government like the big businesses had. And so I remember early days, I was reaching out to Senator Schumer back in March of 2020 about small businesses, restaurants. We got to focus on that. And you did that, and you led the Restaurant Independent Association to come together. Can you share a little bit about how you did that and were successful in moving that program forward?
It's unbelievable, but the Independent Restaurant Coalition we came together in mid to late days in March. And within a couple of weeks, we created a coalition that I'm just upset that why did that take COVID for us to start this? We should have started a long time ago. But anyway, we started around this time last year and really worked hand in hand with both our local and federal governments in terms of explaining the issue at hand for independent restaurants. And there was a big gap there between what the government administration at the time understood what was restaurant. They thought, there was restaurants all like Applebee's or McDonald's. And we were like, those are restaurants, but the independent restaurants operate very, very different than these fast food chains, right? And the administration didn't fully understand that. So we had to sort of work parallel with and explain who are we? We represent between 11 and 16 million people in this country that work for independent restaurant, dishwasher, cooks, bartenders, cleaners, black, all of it, like farmers, so on. Once we got in front of them, eventually we have to work constantly on this, right? And we have a call every morning at 10 o'clock where there's new issues. But eventually we got to the finish line, and Senator Schumer was part of signing a $28 million bill, $1 billion bill for independent restaurants. And this will be game changing for that local mom and pop, right? Yep. But this will also, this is what this will look like. When you go through that favorite neighborhood that you love, those independent stores are not going to be closed. And because if they're not going to be closed, you can walk through that neighborhood and be part of it and engage in it. But if those doors are closed and they're not going to open back up, you're not stopping the car. You're not getting off the train there. And what's going to happen to those neighborhoods? They're going to be forgotten about, and you can't find any work there. And we know the downward spiral that's going to happen, right? So it is so vital to us that the mom and pop restaurants stay open, the hair salon stays open, their favorite coffee shop that you like stays open, because that is New York City by its core.
Right. And I don't think people appreciate enough how much of an ecosystem these communities and neighborhoods are, right? That small business, that restaurant, that mom and pop place where people lives, the parks, the culture. They're all the ingredients that make New York what it is, and you can't just take it out and assume it's going to continue to flourish. The other thing I think is interesting, as you were telling that story, it dawned on me, which is that to really advocate effectively, you need to play an air game and a ground game, right? You had all the local restaurants all coming together. You knew their issues. You were speaking with one voice, but at the same time, you got the air game to the influencers. You were able to get to Senator Schumer, to other influencers, and get that support at the government level. And I think that's the key to be successful. You just can't have the air game or the ground game. You got to bring them together if you're going to advocate successfully.
Yeah, and everybody has a role to play, right? You know, you got to understand that chefs like Tom Colicchio and Danny Meyer and amazing New York leaders like that didn't necessarily argue that for themselves, right? We argue this mostly for mom and pop restaurants, right? Yep. And it takes people that understand that we're part of something that is larger than ourselves, which is the restaurant hospitality community. And as leaders and people with big platforms, and we have other ways to navigate our business, it's our job to make sure that our favorite noodle shop in Queens can stay open, right? And once we get the check from the federal and local government, we now are creating town halls in different languages, by the way, because there's a tech gap with those small businesses, and there's also language gap. So we then have to understand, okay, how do we narrow that gap, right? It's not just a financial gap. There's many gaps here, right? And it's our job to make sure, how do we narrow that so the money actually goes out to the businesses that needs and deserves it so badly. But that's the beauty of being part of hospitality. It's a bunch of great, selfless people that wants to put their reputation on the line and have this greater conversation, not only for themselves, but for the greater New York and for the greater of the industry.
As you said, you know, hopefully it doesn't take something like a tragedy like COVID to actually keep this together and continue to work that way, particularly as we're now starting to see light at the end of the tunnel for COVID, right? And then one of the things that I think about is, on the other side of COVID, the world's not going to return to what it was. It's going to be different, and that we're going to need to reimagine how we operate, how we live, how we serve customers, what the meaning of hospitality is. I know in our business, you know, we know people aren't going to come back to the office space to work like they used to work, right? They can work remotely and have, video conferences. So coming back to their office place is going to be about convening and creating a sense of community and a sense of purpose and support groups. And so we're reimagining how our office space is going to be situated, designed, programmed to better reflect that. I as it relates to the restaurant business, as you think forward to that reimagined world, what do you think is going to change in that post-COVID environment?
I think that restaurants, in order to play again and to bring people back to come together, you have to deliver experiences. Whether that is packaged goods that you're sending it to that office, and if the office only going to meet on Mondays and Fridays, all in meetings, when they take that break, that food, when they open that package delivered from you, it needs to be an experience, right?
Yep.
And because the food that you got at home, there's two things that have happened during this year. People cooked more at home, and the food delivery experience to the home has gotten better. So if you're going to compete, you got to elevate that game. And then also, when the customer is coming to your restaurant, they're going to come in many different ways. So we do know that technology is in the center of that. Sometimes they just want to come and pick up, or they're going to have somebody send it and come. So that transaction needs to be very fast and quick, right? And reliable. Second, when they do come in a more traditional sense, it's got to be an experience. So no matter where, the one thing you can't recreate in the package, the one thing you can't recreate in just deliciousness is the room, is the scene, is, oh, who's over there? Oh, I want to speak to so-and-so. Being in the bar, sitting at the table, looking at the design, getting that level of hospitality. So that's the one that we, as chefs, as restaurateurs, that's the one that we got to really drill down on, because it's truly ours, right? We've seen it in sports. It's been great watching, whether it's soccer, basketball, whatever it is, and they have those crowd noises and so on. And it's been helpful, but nothing beats being at the game. Nothing beats going to a concert. So I think there will be a very much sort of amped up demand of being in the room. But then there will also be this, hey, there needs to be a quick transaction that I can trust that is coming at this time. So this has changed us, but guess what? We've always had to pivot and change in whatever business that you were in, right? You think about something like Apple. Every 6 months, there's a new iPhone coming, right?
Yep.
Still the same brand, but it's an upgraded version of what it was before. That's how it's going to be for us as chefs as well. Every 6 months, we got to tweak and pivot.
COVID was an incredible accelerant, right? Things that normally would take 10 years happen in 10 months, and that's going to be a way of life as we live through a regular post-pandemic pivot to grow our businesses. And I think the realization that in creating those experiences, and you refer to it, which is you got to merge the physical and the digital. We call it phygital, right? You have to have that experience has to be omni-channel to reach that customer, to make that transaction as personal as possible, as smooth as possible, as efficient as possible. I want to pivot. I know we're working together on launching a new restaurant at Starrett Lehigh, which is one of our buildings, and it's an extraordinary building, a building almost 100 years old. And actually, when we acquired that building back in, I think it was 2010, the vision we had for the building, since it was an old manufacturing building, was manufacturing creativity. And we wanted companies that were in that building that were manufacturing creativity, but the makers and creators of the 21st century, not from the 19th century and 20th century that were there before. And so, having you open a restaurant there, I think is really consistent with that vision. And I'd love you to share a little bit about what your vision is for that restaurant.
Well, first of all, it's one of the biggest privilege for me to be part of such an iconic building, right? We really don't, after Red Rooster, we're very cautious about how we open restaurants, where we open restaurants. And if the neighborhood doesn't speak to me, or if the building doesn't speak to me, we don't want to do it because it takes years and it's just got to feel right. And having the opportunity and have worked in that building for years, right? Whether it's been going to Martha Stewart or Ralph Lauren or doing cooking events in that building, right? So it's a building that New Yorkers have already have a relationship with. Friends of mine that have studios there, like Giulio Mirherto and a bunch of great architects are in that building, right? So to be able to reimagine that corner is something that I approach with and I think about every day, right? And how can we create something that is special? Because there's been special in that building for, like you said, almost 100 years. And so it's with that sort of respect for the corner and the building itself. And then also there is enormous amount of traffic in that building, even now, even when everybody, maybe just 30% of the offices are back, but people are back in there, in different ages, different races, different culture, creating, right? So creativity is at the core. I think, thinking about environment. So if you create a restaurant today, green's got to be part of that. Sustainability's got to be part of that. There's a level of artistry. We were just working with Zeb and the team this morning about how do we think about this room during the daytime, but how does that transcend to afternoon and night? Where are deliveries going to come to? How does that kitchen function? So we're in the middle of that. But I do know that sustainability will be a big part of it. I do know that this responsibility this will be one of the first restaurants that will open in New York in a building like that post-COVID. So that's a responsibility that we don't take lightly on. So we want to make sure that we cross our T's and dots on all the details there and build something that can add value to an already incredible part of Manhattan. And I know also there's going to be a food hall that's going to be part of that. So we want to build something that adds on value to that, matches that opportunity. So we're having it. We have a lot of fun with it right now. thinking about what food we want to create, and thinking about how to bring back New Yorkers to something that is truly special, that shines both during the day, afternoon, and night.
Yeah, that sounds great. And, interesting when you think about Starrett Lehigh at 2.5 million feet, one of the largest buildings in New York City, in the heart of Chelsea. A big part of it is its community inside the building and around that building. And so, like you experienced in Harlem in a different way, I think you're going to have that opportunity in Chelsea to help bring that community together and be a defining part of that community, particularly in a post-COVID world.
But think about just the word Chelsea, right? It evokes something. We talked about amazing neighborhoods. Chelsea evokes something. Makes me think about the Chelsea Hotel. Makes me think about artistry. You have Jeffrey Koons up the street. You have all the galleries just a couple of blocks away. You have some of the most amazing artists in the world, right? And then you have something like, we think about, of course, Hudson Yards are north of us, but then south of us, you have the meatpacking with all its artistry and so on. And to be in the center of that, right, and have people coming from those amazing art walks, right, walking down, I just feel like creativity and culture is such an underbelly of New York City that people come from. Like, you can walk from the Whitneys all the way up to our building, for example, just for the taste of art. Well, guess what? If I'm coming to New York, it's a major part of why I want to come to New York, right? So that meets its history as well. So that type of stuff inspires us. And that's one of the reasons why we want to be part of it.
So I want to jump on a final question for you, and I want to move to food and family, because just looking at your past from reading about you, which is obviously a big factor. And for me as well, my parents were divorced when I was a young kid, and my dad used to always pick my brothers and I up, and we were 5, 6 years old. First thing we do is go to the food market, and then we spent the whole weekend cooking together, and it became a way of life. And I've, grown up, and my kids have grown up with, that's what we do on the weekends. We cook in the kitchen, we try different things, we travel, we like to taste different foods and understand things. And so, and to me, it's sort of like, as I think about food, it's sort of the glue that holds our values set together, our generations, our culture. And so could you just share a little bit about how that's been for you historically, and then even during COVID, where, you probably had more time to be at home with your son, and how that, that was different for you?
I love that question. My grandmother was the cook in our household. She just lived a couple of blocks away from us. And, I still remember, running between our home and their home and cooking with my grandmother, or she came over to our house. And it was all of it. It was not just the eating part. It was going to the market, looking at food, looking at different parts of food that she could have used, neck, bones, all of it, right? Or running down to our garden, and picking up carrots, radishes, strawberries, depending on what time of the year it was. And it was always a conversation, and it was always a season to do something, whether it was picking, foraging, mushrooms, or, creating a jam, an apple jam or something like that. Bringing that to our family and our son Zion. So Maya and I, we cook so much with Zion. He's definitely a better cook than eater, like any kid, but we try to have fun with it. And you're right, during COVID, we spent a lot of time at home cooking. And parts of it, we stopped cooking meat. Went vegetarian for a while just to try it out, and loved it, felt better, and definitely started to think about animal protein intake and things like that. But just having that joy of cooking breakfast for the family, eating breakfast together. So food is also another reason why people travel to New York, right? Not just sitting down eating it, but going to markets like Chelsea markets, for example, and watching the craftspeople there, or going to a place like the Bronx, for example, when you go into one of those amazing food markets there. So it's always been part of my family story. One of the reasons why I came to New York was, of course, because of food. But I do think that there's a couple of ways you can learn about other people's culture. Music is one, sports is another one, and then there is food and art. And our city, the beautiful thing about our city is we have all of that. So I think when we can go back and sort of re-engage in that, right, we should, that's as fast as we possibly can. And the great thing is with all of those, you can do them at different economical levels. You can go to Rutgers Park and watch basketball and eat at Charles Pan Fried Chicken. You can go to the High Line and watch art for free and then go down to our building and participate, right? So there's so many ways in our great city to be part of sports, parks, food, and art. And that's what makes New York City so special.
That's so well said and so true. And what's really exciting for me is as I've walked the streets over the last few weeks, you see there's a turning point in New York City. The restaurants are full, the energy is there. People are walking on the High Line, walking by the Hudson River. There's outdoor concerts, and I think just with every week, it's going to be another step in that direction where people are going to come back to get the New York City they know and love, and have people like you that make it special. So Marcus, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your leadership and through COVID and leadership in helping build a stronger, more sustainable community on the other side.
Thank you. And I just want to say one thing. As a chef, that I came off a plane 25 years ago with $300, and I just knew that I wanted to work and add value to this city that I adore. I could never imagine 25 years later to have had this incredible ride. But when you're part of New York City, you're going to be there for the good days and for the not so good days. So it's such a privilege and as a chef with the platform, we can't sit on the sidelines. This only will work if chefs, finance, culture, whatever department you work in, say, I'm back in. And opening our restaurant is our way, our collective way of saying, hey, we're back in. And this city will come back better and stronger than ever. And we definitely going to do our part at the Starlight Eye building to create our restaurant, to say to people, this is a love letter to New York City. Come and see us. We appreciate you.
Well, I can't wait to read and taste that love letter. And I'm certain we will come back better and stronger because we're all going to do it together. So thank you again, Marcus. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Be well, be safe. See you soon.
Thank you.
That concludes this week's episode of Recalibrate Reality. As Marcus said, when you're part of New York City, that means being there for the good days and the not so good days. And if we're going to rebuild a more prosperous, more equitable, and more sustainable New York, none of us can sit on the sidelines. Thank you, Marcus Samuelsson, for joining me today. Thank you to the Regional Plan Association and the 92nd Street Y. And thank you to the team for making this week's episode possible. From 75 Rockefeller Plaza in New York, I'm Scott Rechler. See you next week.